Hello, students. Welcome you all to the next session regarding discussion on metal forming process. That is the next type known as extrusion. So already we have discussed regarding drawing in the previous sessions, the metal forming process. Now in this session we will be discussing regarding extrusion. It is also a metal forming process where we are especially using for elongation of the materials with applying the force on a hot material known as billet. So in very simple words you can say that it is a metal forming process where a block of a metal, or you can say that a hot billet, its cross section we are reducing. So you can see here on the screen right now we have shown some of the products which are being developed by the extrusion process. So these are some of the products which you can develop by using the extrusion process. These are some of the products you can see here. So how they are developed, where the hot metal or a billet, its cross section we are reducing it by applying the force through a die of a cross section under some pressure. So the only difference between the drawing and the extrusion is, in the drawing we are pulling the material from the die, but here in the extrusion we are applying the force for the material which is present in the die such that it can be extruded to the other part of the die. So you will be discussing all these things as we move on in these further slides. So let us move one by one. So as I was telling you, this is the picture regarding how the extrusion process is being carried out. So as I was telling you, it is a very simple metal forming process where we are using a block of a metal. So you can see here, this is a block of a metal. This is a block of a metal, or you can call this material as even the billet also. You can see when you're applying the force on a ram through a dummy block. This is the dummy block. The force is applied through the ram to the dummy block, and this dummy block pushes the billet through the die. This is the die. Then the metal is being extruded to the other part, other side, with some high pressure. We call this as a extrusion process. So normally this extrusion process you can carry out either for the materials in the hot conditions or even in the cold conditions also. So we are using this especially for extruding the parts which require large forces for extrusion process. So the process initially it starts by, you can see here in the picture we are having a cylinder. A cylinder is there. Then there is a dummy block, ram, die, and within this container or the cylinder you can see the billet is being present. So this structure entire what you are seeing here, this is the billet, the water blue colored structure. This is the billet, or it is a hot metal block. So as we are applying the force on the ram to the dummy block, it is being pushed in this direction or pressed with a high pressure such that the billet gets extruded and comes out of the die. So the shape of this extruded product, it depends upon the shape of the die. So whatever you need the product, the die cavity has to be created in that particular fashion that you get the desired product. So when the process initially begins for the metals at a higher temperature, at some temperatures, such that it is placed, this hot metal, or it is placed inside this block. At your home you are using toothpaste, so this toothpaste is also nothing but it is the same mechanism of this extrusion itself. So you have seen in your home that if you want the toothpaste to come out of that toothpaste bottle, what you are doing, you are applying the pressure from one end, and to the other end where there is a part, the toothpaste comes outside. So at your home you are using this one. So this is the toothpaste box, and you can see this is the bottle through which the toothpaste needs to be taken out. So what you are doing, you are applying the force So this force we are applying from all these ends. We call this force as a squeezing action. So the same action it is done even in the extrusion process also. So that is the reason that we are taking the example of regarding this toothpaste. Now the process, as I was telling, it is similar to that of toothpaste. So once the force is applied through the ram to the dummy block, the billet is being pushed towards die. So automatically what happens? There are some compressive forces which are developed by the inner sides of the metal container as well as at the die cavity else, that is at the dies. So these are some compressive stresses which have been developed on the main billet material. So automatically what happens? The product gets extruded through the die cavity, and due to this, it increases the utilization of the extrusion process in such a way that you are for the materials which are difficult to form, such as the nickel-based alloys, stainless steels, and other materials, they can be developed using this particular type of process. So mainly the parts or the things required for doing the extrusion process is you should have a container or a cylinder, that is this part. Then you should have the die cavity, the die is prepared. So depending upon the type of the product, what you require, you should shape the die in that particular form. Suppose I want to have a cylindrical product, you can see the die we have been shaped in the form of a cylinder here itself. Then the billet we need here for the placing of the billet, and this billet is being pushed with the help of a dummy block such that there may be uniform pressure developed through the billet with the help of an ram. Now we'll go to the next slide. So yes, in your extrusion process, we are having different types of extrusion. The first extrusion which you are going to study here is known as direct extrusion. Then comes the indirect extrusion. The third one is the cold or impact extrusion, and the fourth one is hydrostatic extrusion. So in today's session, we'll be discussing regarding direct and indirect extrusion, and the remaining two extrusions in the next class. So what is direct extrusion? So if you observe this picture carefully here, you can see that there is a cylinder, or you can say this as even a container also. Inside the cylinder or the container, the billet or a hot block of metal is being placed. This is the metal. Then this hot block of metal or billet, it is on this, the force is applied with the help of a dummy block. You can see here, this is the dummy block. And to this dummy block, the force is actuated with the help of an ram. So if you observe here, a direct extrusion process is an extrusion process in which the flow of the metal through the die cavity, this is the flow of the metal through the die cavity, is in the same direction of the movement of the ram. This is the ram movement. So if the direction of the extruded material and the direction of the ram which is applying the force are in the same direction, then it is an direct extrusion. That is the reason that it is also known by another one name known as forward extrusion. It is also known as forward extrusion. So as I was telling you, here we are using the hot block of metal or a billet inside the container which is being placed, and then we are applying the load with the help of a dummy block which is placed behind the billet, and through the ram it is being pressed such that the material gets extruded through these dies to get the desired shape and size of the product. Now when the metal is flowing, it is experiencing some frictional forces. So where the frictional forces are experienced, especially between the cylinder walls, that is at this particle, at this particular position, that is when the metal is being flowing. So it is experiencing some frictional forces. So where it has been experienced, especially at the walls of the container as well as at the dies also. So at these places there is much amount of friction developed. So therefore, when it is in hot forming process already, which is at higher temperatures, there are chances that when the material is being extruded, there is some formation of oxide scales on this material, which means it is which is reducing the quality of the product. So therefore, to avoid or reduce the chances of the friction, developed between the cylinder surface or the container surface and the die surface, the dummy block which we are using in this extrusion process, you can see here the dummy block which we are using, the diameter of the dummy block, if you observe carefully here, yes, the diameter of the dummy block, if you observe here, its diameter, it is very less when compared to the diameter of the container. So if you observe here, the diameter of the dummy block, it is very less when compared to the diameter of the container, which means when the dummy block is being pushed with the help of a ram, you can see here the billet is being extruded. At the same time, whatever the friction material is there, which is with respect to the wall and the die, that amount of friction material, it stays there itself, which means you will get the friction which is experienced by the cylinder or the walls of the container, it remains there itself, which is not extruded. And that is the reason that whatever the thin structure which you are observing here right now in the figure, you can see here is a thin structure which you are observing here. This thin structure already, this ram is this dummy block has moved to some distance. You can see here this thin structure of metal which is been remaining here after the movement. We call this as skull. So this skull you can remove by the another process. The another important disadvantage is that you can see here when there is a large amount of friction force developed between the walls of the container and the die, which means we need a large amount of force. Large amount of force is to be required to push this billet through the die cavity, which means there is some resistance offered. That is the reason that here when we are using this direct extrusion process, especially for the developments of the rods, bars and hollow tubes, we are experiencing more frictional forces, due to which we need more amount of force for the movement of the material. This is regarding direct extrusion process. Now, let us move on to the next extrusion process. We call it as indirect extrusion process. So if you observe the picture carefully of this indirect extrusion process, the billet, if you are observing, this is the billet. Yes, this is the billet, the red color structure, what you are seeing here in the picture, this is the billet. Then whatever you are seeing here, that is the ram. In this case, the ram, it is a hollow ram. It is a hollow ram. And the blue color structure, this is the die. The dies are placed here. These are the dies. If you observe this diagram carefully, as the force is applied in this direction towards the billet, the material is extruded in the opposite direction through the ram which we are using. This ram which we are using here for the extrusion process, it is a hollow ram. It is hollow in nature. That is the reason that when the force is applied through one end, the extruded material comes out through the other, that is the hollow part in the opposite direction. So therefore, an extrusion process where the work metal flows in the opposite direction to the of the ram movement, we call it as indirect extrusion, or also known by another one name known as backward or reverse extrusion also. If you observe carefully in this picture, you can see that the billet here, it is not having any movement. It is being placed inside the container at one position itself, which means it is stationary. The billet is stationary itself. But the die, when the die is pushed on the into the billet through the hollow ram, the material gets extruded. That is here, it gets extruded through the hollow ram. So the here in this case, especially for the indirect extrusion, the billet and the container, they are not moving anywhere, which means there is no displacement. So as there is no displacement between the billet, as there is no displacement between the billet and the container, which means there is no friction. So if there is no friction, then the force required for the extrusion, it is also very, very less. That is the reason that I have written here, there is no displacement between the billet and the container, which means there is absence of frictional forces, automatically reduces the force required for the extrusion process. But there is some limitation. What is that limitation? To have this kind of extrusion process, the setup what we are doing, it should be done accurately. The setup has to be done very accurately, and it is a little bit a complicated process also. Apart from that, whatever the ram you are using here, the rams, they should be stronger enough, hollow in structure and rigid, such that the material gets extruded through that hollow ram. So this is regarding indirect extrusion. So in the next video lecture, we will be discussing regarding the other two extrusions, that is the cold extrusion and the last extrusion, that is the hydrostatic extrusion also. So we shall stop here. If you have any doubts, you can send me the comments to the checkbox, which is to the email ID present in the checkbox. Okay, students. Thank you.